There's a peculiar kind of truth that lives in old, worn-out things. A truth that a new coat, no matter how expensive, can never quite tell. I was thinking about that as I stood before my wardrobe, my hand hovering over a simple, dark gray coat. It had been my companion for well over a decade, its wool softened by countless winters, its lining patched in 2 places by my own hand. It wasn't a coat of poverty, not really. It was a coat of memories, of bus rides in the rain, of huddling for warmth while watching my son, Samuel, play football on a frosty Saturday morning. But to a stranger's eye, it would tell a different story. A story of making do, of a life lived on the frugal side of things. And today, that was exactly the story I needed it to tell. My Samuel, my wonderful boy, was in love. The kind of love that made his eyes shine and his voice soften. The kind of love I had shared with his father, my dear Arthur, for 42 years before he was called home. The young woman who had captured his heart was named Chloe. She was a delight, truly. She had a laugh like wind chimes and a kindness in her eyes that seemed to reach right into your soul. I had met her several times, and with each meeting, my affection for her grew. She was the daughter I never had. But I hadn't yet met her family, the Harrisons. Samuel had tried to describe them, stumbling over his words, a slight frown creasing his brow. They're different, Mum, he'd said. They've done very well for themselves. Big house in the city, you know the sort. I did know the sort. I knew it all too well. I had spent the first half of my life scrubbing the floors of houses like that, my hands raw and my back aching. I knew the quiet judgment that could hang in the air, thicker than the scent of expensive perfume. I knew the way a glance could measure your worth in a fraction of a second. And so I had a plan. A little test, if you will. Not for Chloe, never for her. My heart told me she was genuine. This was for her parents. I needed to know what kind of family my son was marrying into. Were they people who would see the value in a person, or only the value in their bank account? I'm going to go as the woman I used to be, Samuel, I told him gently. A simple woman, living on a widow's pension, naive to their world. He was horrified, of course. Mom, no. You don't have to do that. It's dishonest. You've worked so hard. You and Dad, you deserve to show them who you are. I smoothed a stray piece of his hair, my heart aching with love for his good, honest soul. My darling boy, who I am is not in a bank statement or the deed to a house. It's in here, I said, tapping my chest. And it's in you. All I want is to see if they are capable of seeing that. Will they welcome your mother, no matter her circumstances? Will they treat her with respect, even if they believe she has nothing to offer? That is the question, Samuel. And it's an important one. He was still uneasy, but he trusted me. He always had. So, I slipped on the old gray coat. I bypassed my comfortable, modern car in the garage and took out the old, modest hatchback Arthur, and I had kept for sentimental reasons. It sputtered to life like an old man clearing his throat, but it was reliable. I put on a pair of sensible, worn-in shoes and a simple headscarf to protect my hair from the wind. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw a reflection of a woman from a bygone era. A woman who knew the price of a loaf of bread down to the last penny. A woman whose greatest luxury was a well-tended garden. I saw my own mother looking back at me. And with a deep breath, I began the long drive into the city, towards the life my son had chosen, feeling like a spy in my own life story. The journey itself felt like a passage between 2 worlds. I left behind the quiet lanes of my village, where ancient oaks stood like sentinels and the air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. My little car hummed along, a familiar and comforting sound. It was the same car Arthur and I had taken on our last holiday together, a simple trip to the coast. The glove compartment still held the seashell he had found for me, its surface smooth and cool to the touch. Holding it for a moment, I felt his presence, a quiet strength bolstering my resolve. He would have understood what I was doing. He, more than anyone, knew the chasm that can exist between having money and having worth. As I drew closer to the city, the landscape transformed. The gentle hills and sprawling fields gave way to a relentless grid of asphalt and concrete. The houses grew larger, more imposing, set back from the road behind meticulously manicured lawns that looked more like green carpets than living grass. There was a sterility to it all, a curated perfection that felt both impressive and deeply unwelcoming. I found the right address, a street named after a type of tree that was nowhere to be seen, replaced by ornate lampposts and identical, imposing brick mansions. The Harrisons' home was the largest of them all. It wasn't a house, it was an estate. A fortress of modern architecture with vast panes of glass that gleamed like vacant eyes. I parked my humble hatchback at the curb, feeling it shrink in the shadow of the Range Rovers and Mercedes that lined the sweeping driveway. For a moment, a wave of genuine intimidation washed over me. The naive, poor woman I was pretending to be suddenly felt very, very real. This was the world that had once made me feel invisible, and the old instincts were hard to shake. I walked up the stone path, my sensible shoes making a soft, shuffling sound that seemed impossibly loud in the profound quiet of the neighborhood. I clutched my handbag, a simple leather purse I'd had for years, its strap softened with age. Before I could even press the bell, the enormous oak door swung open. A woman stood there, silhouetted against a backdrop of blindingly white walls and soaring ceilings. She was tall and slender, dressed in cream-colored trousers and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire outfit. This had to be Eleanor Harrison. "You must be Martha," she said. Her voice was smooth, but it held a note of brittle surprise, as if she were expecting someone, or something, else entirely. Her eyes, a cool, pale blue, performed a swift, expert inventory, flicking from my headscarf, down my old gray coat, to my worn shoes, and back up again. It took no more than a second, but in that moment, I felt I had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. "Eleanor, it's so lovely to finally meet you," I replied, offering my hand and my warmest, most genuine smile. I had to remember to be myself, my true self, just wrapped in a different package. Her handshake was brief, her fingers cool and limp. "Richard is in the drawing room," she announced, turning away before I'd even fully stepped inside. Chloe and Samuel should be down any minute. They were just upstairs. The inside of the house was breathtaking, I had to admit. It was like walking into an art gallery. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, and a spiral staircase of glass and steel dominated the cavernous foyer. But it was cold. For all its grandeur, it lacked a soul. There were no stacks of books by a comfy chair, no photographs of smiling faces on the mantelpiece, no scuff marks on the floorboards where a child might have played. It was a showroom, not a home. A man rose from a low-slung leather sofa as we entered the drawing room. He was as impeccably dressed as his wife, with a sharp suit and a watch on his wrist that glinted under the recessed lighting. This was Richard Harrison. "Richard, this is Samuel's mother," Martha, Eleanor said, with an inflection so subtle it was almost undetectable. But I heard it. It was the same tone one might use to say, "The plumber has arrived." "A pleasure," Richard said, his handshake even firmer and more dismissive than his wife's. His eyes did the same quick scan, but his were less subtle. A flicker of something disdain? Disappointment crossed his features before being replaced by a mask of polite indifference. "So, you came up from the country. Long drive in that little car of yours." And so it began. The first gentle, probing question designed to establish my place in their world. "Oh, it's a wonderful old thing," I said cheerfully, embracing my role. "It's seen better days, of course, but it gets me where I need to go. You can't be too fussy when you're living on a fixed income, can you?" The words hung in the air between us. Eleanor and Richard exchanged a look. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance, but it spoke volumes. It was a look of confirmation. Their suspicions about their son's future mother-in-law were, it seemed, correct. She was poor. She was simple. And as Chloe and Samuel walked into the room at that moment, their faces bright with happiness, I knew the curtain had just risen on a very difficult play. My heart ached for my son, but I held my ground. The test had to continue. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in polite condescension. Richard and Eleanor guided the talk as if navigating a ship through treacherous waters, carefully steering it towards topics that would highlight the gulf between their world and mine. They spoke of a recent trip to the Maldives, lamenting the quality of the champagne on the flight. They discussed the stock market, dropping names of companies and financial advisors as if they were old friends. I just smiled and nodded, playing the part of the bewildered country mouse. "Oh, my goodness, the Maldives," I'd exclaim, my eyes wide with feigned wonder. "I've only ever seen pictures in a magazine. It must be lovely. The furthest I've ever been is a coach trip to the seaside." Eleanor would offer a tight, pitying smile. "Well, travel is an investment in oneself, Martha. It broadens the mind. Perhaps Samuel could treat you one day, when he's more established." The implication was clear, when he was no longer burdened by the potential costs of caring for his simple mother. Chloe, bless her heart, was in a constant state of gentle intervention. "Mom, Martha has traveled all over the country in her time. She has stories you wouldn't believe. She knows every back road and hidden gem. It's a different kind of travel." "Yes, dear, I'm sure," Eleanor would reply, patting her daughter's hand as if placating a child. Richard, meanwhile, took a more direct approach. "Samuel tells us you're retired, Martha," he stated, swirling a glass of amber liquid. "Worked in housekeeping, was it?" "I did all sorts of things to make ends meet over the years," I said honestly, thinking of the decades of relentless work. "Cleaning, mending, taking in laundry. Whatever was needed to put food on the table for my boy after his father took ill." I didn't mention that Arthur and I had started our own commercial cleaning business, a small venture that grew, through sheer grit and integrity, into a multi-million-pound enterprise that now employed over 500 people. I didn't mention that the housekeeping had been for our own company in the early days, when we worked alongside our first employees to ensure every job was done to perfection. "Admirable," Richard said, the words sounding like an insult. "A strong work ethic is important. But in today's world, it's about working smart, not just hard. Financial planning. Assets. That's the key to security in your later years. I hope you have a solid pension at least." "Oh, I get by," I said with a little shrug. "My needs are simple. A roof over my head, my garden, and seeing my Samuel happy. That's all the wealth I need." I could see Samuel tensing beside me. His jaw was clenched, and a muscle twitched in his cheek. He was a good man, my son, and it was killing him to sit here and listen to them patronize the woman who had given him everything. He caught my eye, a silent plea in his gaze. "Can we stop now?" I gave him the slightest shake of my head, a look that said, "Stay strong. We're almost there." Dinner was served in a formal dining room with a table so long it felt like we were shouting across a canyon. The food was intricate and beautifully presented, tiny portions of things I couldn't pronounce, drizzled with exotic sauces. I looked at the array of cutlery beside my plate, a silver arsenal of forks and spoons for every conceivable purpose. I picked up the wrong fork for the starter, a deliberate mistake. I saw Eleanor notice. She didn't say a word, but a little smirk played on her lips as she glanced at Richard. It was a small, cruel moment of shared superiority. Chloe noticed too, and her own face flushed with embarrassment for her mother's rudeness. "It all looks so fancy," I said, trying to diffuse the tension Chloe was feeling. "Back home, it's usually just meat and 2 veg for me. Easy and filling." "Well, one must expand one's palate," Richard pronounced from the head of the table. "Samuel is becoming quite the connoisseur. We took him to a Michelin-starred restaurant last month. He has a taste for the finer things. It's important he keeps aspiring to that." He looked directly at me as he said it, his meaning as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. He was worried my simple, common tastes would drag his future son-in-law back down to earth. That was when Chloe finally put her fork down. Her movement was quiet, but deliberate. "Dad, Martha is one of the best cooks I know," she said, her voice low but firm. "The shepherd's pie she makes could win awards. It's real food, made with love. It's not about being fancy. It's about nourishment. In every sense of the word." There was a stunned silence. Eleanor looked at her daughter as if she had just started speaking a foreign language. Richard's face hardened. He was not a man who was used to being contradicted, especially by his own child. "Chloe, we are merely trying to have a pleasant conversation," Eleanor said, her voice icy. "No," Chloe replied, her gaze unwavering. "You're not. You are judging Martha based on her coat and her car and the fact that she doesn't know which fork to use for her quail egg. You haven't asked her a single real question about her life, about what she loves, about the son she raised into the wonderful man I am going to marry. You've just been cruel. My heart swelled. This was it. This was the moment that mattered more than any other. It wasn't about me revealing my true circumstances. It was about Chloe on her own, without any knowledge of the truth, standing up for what was right. It was about her character, which was shining more brightly than all the polished silver and crystal in that cold, cavernous room. Richard's face was turning a blotchy red. "Now you listen here, young lady," he began, pointing a finger at her. "We have provided you with the very best of everything. We have standards. And I will not have you throwing that back in our faces because of some sentimental nonsense. We are concerned about your future. Samuel is a fine young man, but he needs to be with a family that can elevate him, not one that will be a financial liability." It was the final straw. The words, so callous and calculated, hung in the air like a foul poison. Samuel stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. His face was a mask of cold fury. "That's enough," he said, his voice trembling with rage. But before he could say another word, I held up my hand. I looked at Richard, then at Eleanor. My performance was over. The naive, simple woman receded, and in her place stood the woman who had built an empire from dust, the woman who had faced down bank managers and corporate rivals and had never, ever backed down from a fight for what was right. I calmly placed my napkin on the table. I looked at Chloe, and I gave her a smile of such profound love and gratitude that her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, my dear," I said softly. "You have a heart of pure gold. Your father is wrong. You are the one who elevates Samuel." Then I turned my attention back to Richard and Eleanor. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of experience. "You're worried about me being a financial liability, Richard?" I began, my tone even and measured. "Let me tell you about liabilities." The air in the room grew still. The mask of polite society had been shattered, and what lay beneath was raw and exposed. Richard Harrison stared at me, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. Eleanor clutched the stem of her wine glass, her knuckles white. They were like startled predators, unsure if their prey was about to flee or fight back. I had no intention of doing either. I was simply going to tell the truth. "A liability," I continued, my voice as calm as a deep river, "is not a person who has lived a simple life. It's not an old coat or a sputtering car. A true liability is a mountain of debt taken on to project an image of wealth you can't sustain. A liability is a set of values so brittle that it shatters at the first contact with anything genuine. A liability, Richard, is raising your child in a house so full of expensive things that there is no room left for kindness." I let the word settle. I saw a flicker of panic in Richard's eyes, a confirmation of a secret fear I had only guessed at. Theirs was a new, fragile wealth, and they were terrified of losing it, terrified of becoming the very people they looked down upon. "My coat," I said, gesturing vaguely towards the foyer, "is old because it has kept me warm through 20 winters. It has absorbed the tears of a grieving widow and the joyful hugs of a growing son. My car is old because my late husband, Arthur, and I bought it with the first significant profit from our business. We promised we would always keep it to remind ourselves of where we came from. You see, we didn't inherit our money, Eleanor. We didn't get lucky on the stock market." I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady. "For the first 15 years of our marriage, I was a cleaner. I scrubbed floors and toilets in houses much like this one. Arthur worked as a night watchman. We saved every penny, not for fancy holidays, but for a dream. We dreamed of starting our own company, a commercial cleaning service built on a simple principle: do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and treat every employee with the dignity they deserve." I could see Chloe listening, her expression a mixture of astonishment and dawning understanding. Samuel stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his anger replaced by a quiet, fierce pride. "We called it A&M Services for Arthur and Martha. For the first 2 years, we were the only employees. We worked 18-hour days. My hands were cracked and bleeding, but we were happy because we were building something together. It grew, slowly at first, then all at once. That little company, born from bleach and buckets, is now one of the largest facilities management corporations in the country. We have offices in 3 cities and, as I said, we employ over 500 people. They are good people. People who work hard, just as you said, Richard. But they also have pensions, very solid pensions that I personally oversee, because I believe that after a lifetime of hard work, a person deserves security and peace of mind. I paused, picking up the correct fork for the main course, which now sat cold and forgotten on my plate. I held it up. So, you see, I know which fork to use. I've sat at dinner tables with CEOs and foreign dignitaries. I've negotiated multi-million-pound contracts. But I also know what it feels like to be so hungry that you cry. I know the shame of having a hole in your shoe on a rainy day. And I would never, ever, for all the money in the world, make another human being feel small for the circumstances of their life. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound that I could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the vast, empty house. Eleanor's face was ashen. The carefully constructed mask of superiority had crumbled, revealing a woman who looked lost and small. Richard simply stared at his plate, his jaw working silently. All the bluster, all the condescending pronouncements had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. I turned to my son and my future daughter. Samuel. Chloe. I am so sorry, I said, my voice softening again. This was my test, and it was a selfish one. I put you both in a terrible position. I was afraid, you see. Afraid that the world I had worked so hard to escape was about to claim my son. But I was wrong to be afraid. Samuel, you chose a woman of incredible character, strength, and compassion. And Chloe, I said, looking directly at her, my heart overflowing, you didn't just pass some silly test. You showed me what family truly is. It's standing up for each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You have a mother's heart, my dear. And I would be the proudest woman in the world to be your mother-in-law. Chloe's tears finally spilled over, but they were tears of relief and joy. She came around the table and wrapped her arms around me in a fierce, loving hug. Over her shoulder, I saw Samuel looking at me, his eyes shining with a love so deep it took my breath away. He wasn't angry at my deception. He understood. I think we should go now, Samuel said quietly, his arm firmly around Chloe. No one protested. Richard and Eleanor remained seated, frozen in their tableau of shock and shame. As we walked back through the cavernous foyer, my old gray coat hanging on the rack seemed to stand a little taller. I shrugged it on, and its familiar weight felt like a comfort, a shield of authenticity. Stepping out of that cold, sterile mansion and into the cool night air felt like waking from a bad dream. The 3 of us walked to my little hatchback, a united front. As Samuel opened the passenger door for Chloe, she turned to me. Martha, she said, her voice thick with emotion, your shepherd's pie. Can you teach me how to make it sometime? I laughed, a real, full-throated laugh of pure happiness. Of course, my darling, I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. Of course I can. The drive home was quiet, but it was a comfortable, contented silence. The little car didn't sputter. It hummed along, carrying us away from a world of glass and steel and back towards a world of warmth and substance. I glanced in the rearview mirror, not at my own reflection, but at the 2 young people in the back seat. Chloe had her head on Samuel's shoulder, and he was holding her hand. They were a team. They were a family. When we arrived back at my cottage, the lights were on, casting a warm, golden glow out into the darkness. It looked so inviting, so real. Inside, the fire was laid in the grate, ready to be lit. My late husband's armchair sat waiting, and photographs of a life well lived smiled down from every surface. This was wealth. This was abundance. That night, I had not set out to prove that I was rich. I had set out to discover if they were poor. And in the end, the answer was clearer than I could have ever imagined. The Harrisons, with all their money and all their possessions, were the most destitute people I had ever met. They were impoverished in spirit, bankrupt of kindness. I, on the other hand, felt like the richest woman on earth. My plan, born of sadness and struggle, had yielded an unexpected treasure. I hadn't just gained a daughter-in-law, I had found a daughter. I had confirmed that the son I raised was a man of integrity and love. And I had been reminded that the greatest legacy you can leave behind isn't a fortune. It's the values you instill, the love you share, and the strength of the characters you have helped to build. As I sat by the fire, the old seashell from the coast in my hand, I thought of Arthur. I knew he would have been so proud. Not of the money or the business, but of this. Of our son, of his incredible Chloe, and of the family they were about to build, founded not on the shifting sands of wealth, but on the solid rock of love and respect. And that was a foundation that would last forever. The scent of baking has a language all its own. It speaks of patience, of warmth, of transformation. A few simple ingredients, flour, butter, potatoes, love, can become a shield against the cold, a comfort for a wounded heart. A week after that fateful dinner, my kitchen was filled with the savory aroma of shepherd's pie. Chloe was beside me, her brow furrowed in concentration as she carefully piped mashed potatoes onto the rich, simmering mince. Her sleeves were rolled up, a dusting of flour on her cheek, and she had never looked more beautiful. The promise I had made in the shadow of her parents' grand, cold house was being fulfilled in the heart of my warm, little cottage. We hadn't spoken much about her parents since that night. The drive home had been cocooned in a shared, unspoken understanding. But I knew the silence couldn't last. A rift that deep doesn't heal on its own. It festers. I saw it in the way Chloe would sometimes stare into the middle distance, her laughter cutting off a fraction of a second too soon. She was here with us, with Samuel and me, but a part of her was still back in that cold dining room, grappling with the ghosts of what her family was supposed to be. "My mom never taught me to cook," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper above the gentle bubbling of the gravy. "We had a cook, Mrs. Gable. She was a lovely woman, but it wasn't the same. Mom said a kitchen was no place to build a future." I reached over and gently wiped the flour from her cheek with my thumb. "A kitchen is where you build a family, my dear," I told her. "A future is just a series of meals shared with people you love. Everything else is just details." She gave me a watery smile, and in that moment, I saw the full weight of the burden she was carrying. She had chosen love, she had chosen integrity, but in doing so, she had been forced to confront the profound emptiness of her own upbringing. She wasn't just losing her parents' approval, she was mourning a childhood that had been materially full, but emotionally starved. Later that evening, the three of us sat by the fire, the empty plates from our dinner stacked on the coffee table. The silence was comfortable, but it was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Samuel took Chloe's hand. "Have you spoken to them?" he asked gently. Chloe took a deep breath. "I spoke to Mum this morning," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, the way people speak when they are trying to keep themselves from shattering. It wasn't a good conversation. She didn't apologize. She said I had embarrassed them, that I had been disrespectful and ungrateful. Ungrateful. Samuel's voice was tight with disbelief. For what? For them insulting my mother. For everything, Chloe clarified, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. For the private schools, the car they bought me, the life they provided. She said this Martha woman, she used that phrase, this Martha woman, had filled my head with sentimental nonsense. She said I was throwing my life away on a fantasy and that I would come to regret turning my back on the people who knew what was best for me. The cruelty of it hung in the air. Eleanor wasn't trying to understand. She was trying to wound, to manipulate, to use guilt as a leash to pull her daughter back into line. I felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce, but I suppressed it. My anger wouldn't help Chloe. She needed comfort, not a champion charging into battle. "And your father?" I asked softly. "He didn't come to the phone," she whispered. Mum said he was too disappointed to speak to me. My heart broke for her. The tactical cruelty of it was breathtaking. They were isolating her, punishing her for her display of character. Samuel wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "Then they are fools, Chloe. They are absolute blind fools. Their loss, not yours." never yours." She buried her face in his shoulder, and her body was racked with silent sobs. I got up and put another log on the fire, giving them their space. The crackle of the fresh wood filled the room. This was the true aftermath. The single, glorious moment of defiance had passed, and now came the long, grinding days of dealing with the fallout. The test I had set in motion had not just revealed the Harrisons' character, it had detonated a bomb in the center of Chloe's life. A small, cold stone of guilt settled in my stomach. I had wanted to protect my son, but in doing so, had I inadvertently caused this wonderful young woman immeasurable pain? The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. Chloe and Samuel were inseparable, their bond forged even stronger in the crucible of her family's rejection. They started planning their wedding, not with the frantic energy of most young couples, but with a quiet, determined focus. It was as if they were building a fortress of their own, brick by brick, against the cold world her parents represented. They decided against a large, lavish affair. "I don't want a performance, Martha," Chloe told me one afternoon as we sat in my garden, weeding the rose bushes. "I've spent my whole life performing the role of the perfect daughter, the successful student, the sophisticated young woman. The wedding, I want it to be real. I want to be surrounded by people who are there because they love us, not because they want to be seen." So, the plan became a small ceremony at the old village hall, followed by a reception here, in my garden. It would be simple, beautiful, and heartfelt. Chloe wanted fairy lights strung through the branches of the old apple tree, long wooden tables for the guests, and wildflowers in jam jars. She wanted a celebration, not a production. She wanted the kind of warmth my cottage represented. But her parents were a constant, looming presence. Eleanor would call every few days. The calls were always the same. They began with a veneer of maternal concern. "Chloe, darling, I'm just worried about you. Are you eating properly? You sound tired." But they would inevitably spiral into a barrage of emotional blackmail. "Your father and I were looking at wedding venues for you, you know." Before all this, unpleasantness. The ballroom at the Grand Hotel. It would have been magnificent. "It's what you deserve, darling, not some rustic gathering in a field." Each call left Chloe pale and shaken. She would end the conversation, her hand trembling, and retreat into a quiet sadness for hours. It was death by 1,000 cuts. They weren't shouting anymore. They were just quietly, methodically trying to dismantle her happiness, to make her new life seem small and shabby compared to the one they believed she had thrown away. One Saturday morning, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Richard Harrison standing on my doorstep. He was alone. Dressed in a golf shirt and expensive chinos, he looked profoundly out of place against the backdrop of my rambling cottage garden. He held a long, thin box in his hands. "Martha," he said, his tone clipped and formal. "May I have a word?" I was surprised, to say the least. I stepped aside and let him in, gesturing towards the living room. "Samuel and Chloe are out for a walk," I said, my voice neutral. "Good," he replied. "It's you I wanted to see." He sat on the edge of my husband's old armchair, looking deeply uncomfortable, as if the worn fabric might stain his trousers. He placed the box on the coffee table between us. "I won't pretend that I approve of this situation," he began, forgoing any pleasantries. "I believe Chloe is making a terrible mistake. She is an emotional girl, always has been. She is being swept up in a romantic notion that has no bearing on reality. The reality," I said calmly, "is that your daughter and my son are very much in love." He waved a dismissive hand. "Love doesn't pay the bills, Martha. Love doesn't secure a future. Ambition does. Drive does. Samuel is a bright young man, I'll grant you that. He has potential, but he's squandering it. He should be aiming higher." "Higher than happiness?" I asked. He ignored the question. "I'm here to make a proposal. A sensible one." He tapped the box. "These are architectural plans. A new house. I bought a plot of land for them as a wedding gift. It's in our neighborhood. A good investment. I'm also prepared to offer Samuel a senior position at my investment firm. A 6-figure salary to start, with significant opportunities for advancement. It would set them up for life. The right life." I stared at him. He truly didn't understand. He thought this was about money. He thought he could buy his daughter's compliance, buy my son's ambition, and erase the ugliness of that dinner with a sufficiently large check. "What's the catch, Richard?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "There is no catch," he said, but his eyes told a different story. "There is merely a condition. A condition of reconciliation." Chloe apologizes for her outburst. "You all agree to put this unfortunate incident behind us. The wedding will be postponed, of course. It needs to be planned properly at a suitable venue. We will handle the costs. All of them. It will be the wedding Chloe deserves." He looked around my cozy, cluttered living room with a look of undisguised distaste. "Not this." It was a declaration of war, dressed up as a peace treaty. He was trying to buy my son, to erase my influence, and to force Chloe back into the gilded cage she had just escaped. I stood up. "Richard, I think you should leave," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He looked taken aback. "You're refusing? On their behalf? This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Are you so selfish that you would deny your son this chance, just to prove a point?" "My son doesn't need his future mother-in-law's father to buy him a career," I said, my control beginning to fray. "He's built his own, very successful one, through his own talent and hard work. As for the house, they will choose their own home, one filled with love, not with the expectation of keeping up appearances. And this," I said, my gesture taking in my entire home, "this is what they want. They want a life that is real. They don't want your life, Richard. And the fact that you can't see that, the fact that you think you can walk in here and purchase their happiness like it's a new car, that is the saddest thing I have ever seen." He stood up, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. He was a man who was used to getting his own way, and my refusal was an affront he couldn't comprehend. He snatched the box from the table. "You will regret this," he snarled. "You've poisoned her against us. When this all falls apart, when the romance fades and they're left with nothing, I hope you remember this day." He stormed out, and I closed the door behind him, my heart pounding in my chest. I leaned against the wood, the guilt from before now replaced with a cold, hard certainty. I had done the right thing, but I knew this was far from over. Richard and Eleanor were not going to surrender. They were going to escalate. And I was terrified of the pain their next move would inflict upon the person who least deserved it, Chloe. The battle for her future was just beginning. The ultimatum arrived a week later, not via a phone call, but in a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by courier. It was addressed to Chloe. She opened it at my kitchen table, her hands trembling so much that Samuel had to steady them. It was a letter from her parents, jointly signed. The words were cold, formal, and utterly brutal. They were deeply saddened by her choices. They could not, in good conscience, support a union that was so clearly detrimental to her long-term security and social standing. Therefore, if she chose to go ahead with this inappropriate and meager wedding, they would not be in attendance. Furthermore, her ties to the family, both personal and financial, would be formally severed. The trust funds set up in her name would be dissolved, its assets redirected to a charity of their choosing. They were, in effect, disowning her. The letter fell from Chloe's fingers and fluttered to the floor. She just sat there, staring at the space where it had been, her face a pale, frozen mask. All the color had drained from her world. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep, the wound too clinical and profound for tears. It was the final, devastating blow, delivered with the precision of an executioner. Samuel knelt beside her, his face a storm of fury and pain. "Chloe, my love, look at me." He tried to take her hand, but it was limp, unresponsive. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for help, for some words of wisdom that could possibly mend this. But I had no words. My little test, my foolish, prideful plan, had led to this. I had wanted to see if they were worthy of my son. I had never stopped to consider the price Chloe might have to pay for their failure. I walked over and knelt on her other side, my old knees protesting. I didn't say anything. I just put my arm around her shoulders and held her. I could feel the tremors running through her body. We stayed like that for a long time, the three of us a small, broken circle in the warm afternoon sun slanting through the kitchen window. The letter lay on the floor like a poisonous snake, its venom already coursing through our small, happy world. Richard and Eleanor had made their final move. They had gambled that their daughter's love for them, and her fear of being cast out, was stronger than her love for Samuel. They had forced her to choose, once and for all. After what felt like an eternity, Chloe finally moved. She took a shuddering breath and looked from Samuel to me. Her eyes were hollow, filled with a pain so deep I could barely stand to look at it. "They never loved me," she whispered, the words so quiet they were almost lost. "They loved the idea of me, the daughter who reflected well on them. The moment I stopped being that, I stopped existing." It was a terrible, devastating realization for a child to have, no matter their age. It was the final, brutal truth that had been hiding behind the expensive gifts and the grand houses her whole life. Samuel held her face in his hands. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not the idea of you. You. Your kindness, your stubbornness, your beautiful heart. All of it. And my mom loves you. We are your family. Right here. This is real." Slowly, painfully, a single tear traced a path down Chloe's cheek. And then another. The dam broke, and she collapsed into Samuel's arms, weeping with the kind of gut-wrenching grief that comes from losing something you never truly had. I held on to her, my own tears falling freely now, for her, for the cruelty of her parents, for the terrible cost of love. That night, none of us could sleep. We sat up late talking. Not about the letter, but about the future. About the wedding. About the life they would build. It was a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let the Harrisons' poison seep into the foundations of their new life. "I still want to get married in the garden," Chloe said, her voice hoarse but firm. "I want the fairy lights and the wildflowers. I want to be surrounded by joy, not obligation. I want to marry you," she said, looking at Samuel, "and I want to do it on our terms." A new strength was being forged in her, born from the ashes of her old life. She was no longer just the brave girl who had stood up for me at dinner. She was a woman who had looked into the abyss of her parents' conditional love and had chosen to walk away, towards a different, more authentic light. The next morning, Chloe did something I will admire for the rest of my days. She took a piece of my simple writing paper, and with a steady hand, she wrote a reply. It was only 2 sentences long. "I am sorry you feel that way. I will miss you." She sealed it in an envelope and sent it on its way. There was no anger, no recrimination. Just a quiet, dignified statement of fact and a farewell. She was closing a door. Not slamming it, but closing it gently so that she could finally turn and face the one that was opening before her. As I watched her and Samuel walk hand in hand down the garden path to post the letter, I knew that the pain was far from over. The scars of that rejection would remain. But I also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that they would be all right. They had each other, and they had me. We were a small family, forged in a fire none of us had asked for, but we were strong. We were real. And as I started to sketch out a seating plan for a wedding reception in my garden, I felt a profound sense of peace. The cost had been high, but what we had gained, a family built on the unshakable foundation of unconditional love, was, I knew, utterly priceless. There is a quiet dignity in things made by hand. It's a quality born of time and intention, something that can never be replicated by a machine or purchased in a hurry. In the month leading up to the wedding, my little cottage was transformed into a workshop of quiet dignity. We didn't have wedding planners or caterers shouting into phones. We had the gentle hum of my old sewing machine as I altered a vintage lace dress for Chloe. We had the scent of vanilla and lemon as she and I practiced the recipe for the wedding cake. We had Samuel in the garden, carefully stringing hundreds of tiny fairy lights through the gnarled branches of the old apple tree, his brow furrowed with the same concentration he used to apply to his schoolwork as a boy. Each folded napkin, each handwritten place card, each jar of wildflowers picked from my own garden beds was an act of love. It was a silent, steady repudiation of the grand, empty ballroom at the Grand Hotel. We were not building a spectacle. We were weaving a sanctuary. But through it all, the ghost of Chloe's parents lingered. Their absence was a tangible thing, a cold spot in our warm, bustling preparations. Chloe was brave. She threw herself into every task with a determined grace, but I would sometimes catch her in a quiet moment, staring at her phone, her thumb hovering over her mother's contact information before sighing and putting it away. She didn't speak of them, but the wound was there, a fresh and tender bruise on her heart. She was choosing this life, this love, with every ounce of her being, but the choice had come at the cost of the family she was born into. And no amount of joy could completely erase the pain of that fundamental rejection. One afternoon, about a week before the wedding, I found her sitting on the little stone bench at the bottom of the garden, a small, leather-bound photo album in her lap. It was one I hadn't seen before. The pictures were of her as a child, a little girl with big, solemn eyes on a ridiculously large pony, a girl in a starchy school uniform holding a tennis trophy, a polite smile fixed on her face. In every photograph, she was immaculate, posed, and profoundly alone. Her parents were rarely in the pictures with her. If they were, they stood at a slight distance, smiling at the camera, not at their daughter. "Mrs. Gable gave me this," she said softly, tracing the outline of her own small face in one of the photos. "She was the cook. She was with us until I was 12. She took all these pictures. My parents, they didn't really do photos." An idea began to form in my mind. A risky idea, perhaps, but one that felt right deep in my bones. It felt like a way to give Chloe back a piece of the genuine warmth that had been stolen from her childhood. "She sounds like a lovely woman," I said carefully. "Do you ever wonder what happened to her?" Chloe shook her head, a sad little smile playing on her lips. "All the time. She was let go. Mom said her food was becoming too rustic. I think she just got old. I was heartbroken. She used to let me sit in the kitchen and watch her bake. She'd give me little bits of dough to play with. She was the one who was there when I fell and scraped my knee, not my mother." That evening, when the house was quiet, I made a phone call. It wasn't hard to find her. A&M Services had a small but highly effective private investigation division, a discreet service we offered to corporate clients for due diligence. I had only ever used them for business. But this was personal. Within a day, I had an address and a phone number from Mrs. Agnes Gable, living in a small seaside town about 3 hours away. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect late summer days when the air is warm but holds the first crisp promise of autumn. My garden was transformed. The fairy lights in the apple tree looked like captured stars, the long tables were dressed in simple white linen, and the jam jars overflowed with dahlias, lavender, and cosmos. It was breathtaking in its simplicity and sincerity. Chloe was getting ready in my bedroom. The vintage lace dress, which had belonged to my own mother, fit her as if it were made for her. With her hair swept up and a few sprigs of baby's breath tucked into it, she looked ethereal, timeless. But her eyes were shadowed with that familiar sadness. The moment was here, and the two people who were supposed to be by her side were absent. Just as Samuel, looking impossibly handsome and nervous in his suit, came to tell us the guests had all arrived, there was a soft knock at the front door. I went to answer it. An elderly woman stood on the threshold, her face a roadmap of kind wrinkles, her eyes a warm, intelligent blue. She was holding a small, slightly lopsided cake in a tin. "I'm Agnes Gable," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "You must be Martha. You were so kind to call." "Agnes," I said, my heart swelling. "Thank you so much for coming. Please come in." I led her upstairs to my room. "Chloe, my dear," I said, pushing the door open. "There's someone here to see you." Chloe turned from the mirror, her brow furrowed in confusion. She looked at Agnes, and for a moment, there was just a blank incomprehension. And then, her face crumpled. Her sophisticated poise, her adult composure, all of it fell away, and she was just a little girl again. "Mrs. Gable," she whispered, her voice choked. "Oh, my sweet girl," Agnes said, her own eyes filling with tears. She put the cake tin down and opened her arms. Chloe flew into them, burying her face in the older woman's shoulder and sobbing, not with grief this time, but with a profound, overwhelming wave of love and release. "I brought you a lemon drizzle cake," Agnes murmured, stroking Chloe's hair. "I always remembered it was your favorite." In that moment, a broken piece of Chloe's past was made whole. It wasn't about replacing her mother. It was about acknowledging that love had been there for her all along, hidden away in the kitchens and the quiet corners of her lonely childhood. It was proof that she had been cherished, truly and unconditionally, by someone. The ceremony took place under the apple tree. There were only 30 guests, close friends, a few of my most loyal senior employees who had known Samuel since he was a boy, and now Agnes Gable, sitting in the front row, beaming. As Chloe walked down the makeshift aisle on Samuel's arm, they had decided to walk together, as equals starting a new life. I saw that the shadow in her eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a light, brilliant and clear. Their vows were the heart of the day. They hadn't written them down. They spoke from a place deeper than memory. "Chloe," Samuel began, his voice thick with emotion as he took her hands. "From the first moment I met you, I felt like I had come home. You are the kindest, strongest, most wonderful person I have ever known. You taught me that wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. I promise to spend the rest of my life building a home with you that is rich in laughter, in honesty, and in love. You are my true north. You are my everything." When it was Chloe's turn, she looked at Samuel, then let her gaze sweep over our small, gathered family. "I spent a lot of my life believing that love was something you had to earn," she said, her voice clear and steady. "That it was conditional on being perfect, on meeting expectations. Then I met you, Martha, and you showed me what love really is. It's a safe harbor. It's a warm kitchen. It's standing up for someone, no matter the cost. Samuel, you didn't just ask me to be your wife. You invited me into a family. I promise to cherish this gift, to build on this foundation of truth, and to love you and stand by you unconditionally for all of my days." As they exchanged rings, the simple gold bands seeming to shine with a light of their own, I looked at this little circle of love we had created. My foolish, clumsy test, born of fear and old wounds, had been redeemed. I hadn't exposed the Harrisons so I could be proven right. I had done it so my son could find a life of truth. And he had. In the end, I had acted like a poor and naive mother, and it turned out that I had become the richest woman in the world, blessed with a son of impeccable character and a daughter whose heart was pure gold. The reception was a joyful, chaotic, beautiful affair. We ate shepherd's pie and Mrs. Gable's lemon drizzle cake. We danced on the lawn to music from a simple speaker, and our laughter filled the evening air. There was no pretense, no performance. It was just joy. Late in the evening, as the stars began to appear, Chloe found me by the rose bushes. She hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Martha," she whispered. "For everything. For testing them. For showing me the truth. For giving me a family. For finding Agnes. My darling girl," I said, holding her close. "You did all the hard work. All I did was open the door." Years passed. The little cottage remained the heart of our family, its garden growing a little wilder, its rooms filled with more memories. Samuel and Chloe built a life that was a testament to their vows. They didn't live in a mansion, but their home was a beautiful, light-filled house filled with books, art, and the constant presence of friends. Samuel's career flourished on his own terms, and Chloe discovered a passion for landscape gardening, transforming dull city spaces into vibrant green oases. She had a gift for making things grow. I am much older now. My steps are slower, and my hands, which once scrubbed floors and built a business, are now mostly occupied with holding storybooks and wiping away small tears. This afternoon, I am sitting on the same stone bench where I once saw a sad young woman holding a photo album. But today, I am not alone. A little girl with Samuel's eyes and Chloe's determined chin is trying to catch a butterfly. Her name is Rose, after the flowers in my garden. Chloe and Samuel are nearby, weeding the vegetable patch together, their heads close, a comfortable silence between them that speaks of a decade of shared love. Rose gives up on the butterfly and runs to me, her small hands grabbing my old, wrinkled ones. "Grandma Martha," she says, her voice full of childish importance. "Mummy says you make the best shepherd's pie in the whole world. Is that true?" I smile, my heart so full it feels like it might burst. I pull her onto my lap, the familiar weight of a beloved child a profound comfort. "I don't know if it's the best in the world, my love," I tell her, kissing the top of her head. "But I made it for your granddad Arthur, then for your daddy, and then for your mummy. And one day, I'll teach you how to make it, too." She leans her head against my chest, content. I look over at my son and the incredible woman he married, at the life they have built, at the love that radiates from them. I think of the old gray coat, now retired and resting in a chest upstairs. I had set out all those years ago on a mission of deception, pretending to be a woman of simple means. It turned out that the role was closer to the truth than I ever could have imagined. Because in the end, my real wealth was never in a bank. It was right here in my arms, laughing in my garden. It was a legacy not of money, but of love. And it was more than enough.